Get that baby out of here. This is not a daycare. The sentence cracked across the sterling room like ice splitting under polished shoes. For one long second, even the grand piano seemed to forget its melody. Forks hovered in midair. Wineglasses paused inches from painted lips. Around the candlelit dining room, Manhattan's wealthiest guests turned toward the sound that had ruined their perfect evening. The nonstop crying of an 11-month-old baby in the arms of a billionaire who suddenly looked like he had lost everything he knew how to control. Ethan Whitmore stood near table 12, 6'2", silver cuff links flashing beneath the amber chandeliers, his tailored navy suit sharp enough for a magazine cover and completely useless against the small, shaking child pressed against his chest. Noah Whitmore screamed until his face flushed red, tiny fists gripping the lapel of his father's jacket as if begging the world to stop spinning. Ethan tried the bottle again. Noah pushed it away. He tried the pacifier. It fell to the carpet. He whispered his son's name with the same voice that had silenced boardrooms from Chicago to Wall Street. But the baby only cried harder. That was the humiliation no money could soften. Ethan Whitmore could buy a private jet before lunch, close a 9-figure acquisition before dinner, and make grown executives sweat with one raised eyebrow. But inside that restaurant, beneath chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, he could not give his own child peace. Across from him, Claire Donovan leaned back in her white dress, her smile frozen into something polite and cold. She did not reach for Noah. She did not stand. She simply glanced toward the other tables, embarrassed by the attention, then murmured through her teeth, "Maybe you should take him outside before this becomes a scene." But it was already a scene. The kind money hates because it cannot be edited. The kind power fears because everyone is watching. Near the service bar, Aaliyah Carter stood with a silver tray balanced in one hand and a white linen towel folded over her wrist. She had been invisible all night in the way black waitresses in expensive rooms are often expected to be invisible, present when needed, silent when dismissed, graceful enough to serve, but never important enough to be seen. Her uniform was simple, black shirt, black slacks, name tag shining under the low light. Her braids were pinned neatly at the back of her head, and her sneakers had carried her through a 9-hour shift without complaint. But her eyes were not tired. They were alert, listening, watching, not the guests, not the manager, the baby. Noah's cry had changed. At first, it was sharp and angry, the normal storm of a tired child trapped in a grown-up room. But now it came in broken waves, breath catching, shoulders tightening, tiny hands searching for something that was not there. Aaliyah noticed what no one else had bothered to see. A small blue cloth had slipped beneath Ethan's chair, half hidden beside the brass leg, embroidered with 2 tiny white letters. E.W. Noah's hand kept opening and closing toward the empty space where it had fallen. The room heard noise. Aaliyah heard need. The manager, Victoria Hale, swept toward Ethan with a practiced smile, the kind designed to protect wealthy guests from ordinary discomfort. "Mr. Whitmore, we can arrange a private room," she said gently, though her eyes flicked toward the crying child as if he were a spilled drink. Behind her, a man at the corner table gave a low laugh and said just loudly enough, "Maybe one of the girls from the kitchen knows what to do." A few people smiled into their napkins. Not real smiles. Cowardly ones. Aaliyah heard that too. Her fingers tightened once around the tray, then relaxed. She did not move because she was offended. She had survived worse comments than that, and still delivered dessert with steady hands. She moved because Noah's cry had begun to thin, because Ethan's face had gone pale, because the richest man in the room looked down at his son with terror in his eyes and no language left to speak. Aaliyah set the tray down without a sound, picked up the little blue cloth, and stepped forward. Victoria caught her arm lightly. "Aaliyah, not now." Aaliyah looked at the manager, then at the baby. Her voice stayed calm. "I'm not interrupting him. I'm listening to his child." The words did not land loudly. They did not need to. They moved through the room softer than thunder and heavier than shame. Ethan turned toward her, still holding Noah awkwardly, pride fighting panic across his face. For a moment, he looked like he might refuse because men like Ethan were trained to refuse help from anyone they had not hired. Then Noah gasped between sobs, and something in Ethan broke open. Not publicly, not dramatically, just enough. Aaliyah held out the cloth and said, "May I try, sir?" The room waited. The billionaire who owned half the skyline looked at the black waitress everyone had overlooked, then looked down at his crying son, and for the first time that night, he stopped pretending he was in control. Ethan did not hand Noah over at first. He loosened his grip by half an inch, then tightened it again, as if the act of accepting help from a waitress felt like signing a confession in front of the whole room. His jaw flexed. His eyes cut toward Victoria, toward Claire, toward the investors, pretending not to stare while staring at everything. Pride is strange that way. It can survive losses, scandals, even enemies, but it trembles when a man has to admit he does not know how to comfort his own child. Noah cried against his chest, smaller now, weaker now, the sound turning from anger into exhaustion. That was what finally moved him. Not the whispers, not the judgment, the breath. His son's breath, catching like a tiny engine that had run too long without rest. Ethan looked at Aaliyah Carter, really looked at her for the first time, past the uniform, past the name tag, past the invisible line that wealthy rooms draw around people who serve. She stood still, one hand open, the small blue cloth resting across her palm. She did not look eager. She did not look intimidated. She looked present. That unsettled him more than panic did. Slowly, awkwardly, Ethan shifted Noah toward her. The restaurant seemed to lean in. Claire sat straighter, her lips pressing into a thin line. Victoria's smile disappeared for just a second before she put it back on like a mask. Aaliyah received the baby with both arms, careful but confident, turning his body gently so his ear rested over her heart. She did not bounce him wildly. She did not shush him like his pain was an inconvenience. She wrapped the blue cloth into his tiny fist, placed one steady hand between his shoulders, and began to sway, not side to side like a performer, but in a slow rhythm that felt older than the room itself. Noah's cry hitched. Aaliyah lowered her voice until it was almost nothing, a soft hum beneath the silver clatter and nervous breathing of strangers. It was not a song made for applause. It was the kind of melody passed through kitchens, hospital rooms, church basements, and apartment hallways at 2 in the morning when rent was due, sleep was gone, and love was the only thing left working. Ethan froze. Not because the baby stopped right away. He did not. Noah fought the calm for a few more seconds, his little shoulders trembling, his cheeks damp, his fingers clutching the cloth as if he had found a piece of home. Then his breathing changed. One broken sob. A pause. Another softer sob. Aaliyah kept humming. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and the room around her disappeared. She was no longer standing under chandeliers in a restaurant where a salad cost $40 and men paid $400 for wine they could not pronounce. She was back in a cramped apartment in Queens at 17 years old, holding her baby brother while her mother worked overnight shifts at St. Mary's Hospital. She remembered the weight of him against her shoulder, the heat of his forehead, the fear of doing everything wrong, and the miracle of learning that love did not require perfection. It required staying. That was what she gave Noah. Not magic. Not luck. Staying. Ethan watched his son's face soften against Aaliyah's shoulder, and something inside him went quiet in the most painful way. He had hired nurses, nannies, consultants, sleep coaches, and pediatric specialists. He had bought imported cribs, sound machines, organic blankets, and every device recommended by people with degrees framed in gold. But this woman, this waitress he had not noticed all evening, had understood in seconds what he had missed for months. Noah did not need another solution. He needed someone who was not afraid of his sadness. At the corner table, the man who had made the kitchen comment lowered his eyes. No one laughed now. The piano player had stopped without realizing it, his fingers hovering over the keys. Claire whispered, "Well, that was lucky," but her voice had lost its shine. Aaliyah opened her eyes and looked down at Noah. His crying had faded into tiny hiccups. His lashes rested wet against his cheeks. The blue cloth was pressed beneath his chin. And then, in a silence too clean for lies, the baby fell asleep. Ethan did not move when the silence came. For almost a full minute, he stood in the center of the sterling room with his arms half raised, as if his body had not accepted that the weight of his son was no longer there. Noah slept against Aaliyah Carter's shoulder, one cheek pressed into the soft black fabric of her uniform, his tiny hand still curled around the blue cloth like it was the last safe thing in the world. The room did not know what to do with peace. It had known irritation. It had known embarrassment. It had known the sharp little judgments wealthy people pass around without moving their mouths. But peace, coming from the arms of the woman they had barely looked at all night, made everyone uncomfortable. Aaliyah kept swaying for a few more seconds, not because she needed to, but because she knew babies could feel when adults rushed a miracle. She had learned that long before this restaurant, long before the chandeliers, long before men in tailored suits decided her name was not worth remembering. She had learned it in apartment 4B in Queens, where the radiator hissed too loudly in winter and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing over grocery money. When Aaliyah was 17, her mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide, leaving before sunrise and coming home with tired feet and a smile that still tried to be brave. Her little brother, Micah, was only 8 months old then, all wide eyes and restless lungs. Some nights he cried for hours, not because he was spoiled, not because he wanted attention, because the world was too big, too loud, too cold, and the people who loved him were doing their best with too little sleep and too many bills. Aaliyah used to hold him the same way she held Noah now, close enough for him to hear her heartbeat, steady enough for him to borrow her calm. Her mother would come home near midnight, smelling faintly of antiseptic and peppermint gum, and whisper, "Baby, you have hands that know how to stay." Aaliyah did not understand it then. She understood it now. Some hands grab, some hands point, some hands sign checks and close doors, but some hands stay. Ethan stared at those hands as if they had revealed a language his money had never translated. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice low enough that only the nearest tables heard it. Aaliyah looked at him, then down at Noah. "He was reaching for this," she said, lifting the corner of the little cloth. And his breathing was uneven. He was not just tired. He was scared. The word scared landed harder than Ethan expected. He had described Noah to doctors as difficult, sensitive, unsettled, sleep-resistant, colicky, every clean term that kept a father from saying what he feared. Scared was different. Scared sounded human. Scared sounded like a child asking for someone to notice. Claire let out a quiet breath and reached for her water glass with too much elegance. "Children cry," she said. "People are acting like this is some kind of revelation." No one answered her. That was the first time Claire looked truly annoyed. Victoria stepped closer, her voice polished again. "Aaliyah, perhaps we should return Mr. Whitmore's son now." Aaliyah did not challenge her. She did not need to. She simply turned slightly, so Ethan could see Noah's sleeping face, softened now, peaceful now, the storm gone from his small body. Ethan reached out, but stopped before touching him. The pause was small, but it said everything. He was afraid to break what she had repaired. Aaliyah saw it. Her expression changed, not with pity, but with something gentler. "Hold him higher on your chest," she said quietly. "Not out here." She touched her own shoulder. "Here, let him feel you breathing." Ethan swallowed. For a man who had addressed arenas, testified before committees, and negotiated across tables longer than most apartments, he suddenly looked like a student on his first day. Slowly, he stepped closer. Aaliyah guided Noah into his father's arms, adjusting Ethan's elbow, placing the blue cloth back beneath the baby's cheek. Noah stirred once. The entire room held its breath. Ethan froze again, but Aaliyah whispered, "Do not stop breathing." So he breathed. Once. Then again. Deep, uneven, honest. Noah settled against him. And in that quiet, Ethan Whitmore realized the room had not been watching a waitress calm his son. They had been watching her teach a billionaire how to hold what mattered. The applause did not come. Not yet. The Sterling room was too ashamed for applause. People who had spent the first 10 minutes judging a crying baby now looked down at their plates as if the answers were hidden beneath the truffle butter and gold-rimmed china. Ethan held Noah against his chest, exactly where Aaliyah had shown him, one large hand spread carefully across the baby's back, the other supporting him like something sacred instead of something inconvenient. His breathing was uneven at first, too controlled, too corporate, the kind of breathing a man uses before stepping onto a stage. Then it softened. Noah remained asleep. That tiny fact changed the temperature of the room. It was not dramatic. No thunder. No music swelling. Just a sleeping child and a father learning, in public, that tenderness is not weakness when it is the only thing strong enough to work. Aaliyah stepped back, giving them space, but before she could return to the service bar, Claire's chair scraped softly against the polished floor. The sound was small, but it carried. "Ethan," she said, her voice wrapped in silk and impatience, "your investors are still waiting. We should move this evening along before people start making this into something it is not. Something it is not." The words floated over the table like perfume covering smoke. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time that night, he did not see elegance. He saw distance. He saw a woman who had smiled beside him in photographs, laughed beside him at fundraisers, worn diamonds at his company events, but had never once learned the rhythm of his son's breathing. Claire smiled back, expecting agreement. That was what people around Ethan usually expected. Agreement, obedience, momentum. But Ethan did not answer. His eyes dropped to Noah's face, to the damp lashes, to the blue cloth tucked under his chin. "He is my son," Ethan said quietly. Claire blinked. "Of course he is. Then why did you speak about him like he was a problem to be managed?" The question did not rise. It did not need to. It settled over the table with the weight of a door closing. Claire's smile tightened. Victoria rushed in with the nervous instinct of someone trained to protect the richest person in the room from emotional inconvenience. "Mr. Whitmore, we can have dessert sent to a private suite upstairs. The staff will make sure everything feels more comfortable." Ethan looked toward her. Comfortable for whom? Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Aaliyah stood 3 feet away, hands folded in front of her, posture calm. She knew this part of the room. Not the marble floors or the imported roses, but the moment after truth appears and everyone tries to push it back under the table. She had watched it happen with rude customers, careless managers, men who apologized only when someone important was listening, women who looked through her until they needed something cleaned. Truth rarely entered expensive rooms politely. It usually arrived through embarrassment. And tonight, it had come wrapped in a baby blanket. At the corner table, the man who had joked about girls from the kitchen shifted in his seat and cleared his throat. "Look, nobody meant anything by it," he said, lifting both hands as if innocence could be performed. Aaliyah turned her head toward him. She did not glare. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him with a steadiness that made his confidence shrink. "You meant enough to say it," she replied. The room went still again. Ethan looked at her then, not as staff, not as a stranger, but as the only person in the room brave enough to name what everyone else had tried to decorate. The man at the corner table stared into his wine. Claire gave a short laugh, sharp and empty. "This is becoming ridiculous." She calmed a baby. "That does not make her a prophet." Aaliyah looked back at Noah, then at Ethan. "No, ma'am," she said softly. "It just means someone listened before judging." For a second, nobody breathed. Then Noah stirred in Ethan's arms, and Ethan instinctively tightened. Aaliyah lifted one finger, gentle but firm. "Slow," she whispered. "Let him feel steady." Ethan obeyed. He breathed slower. Noah settled again. And that was the moment the room understood. The billionaire was no longer taking instructions from pride. He was taking them from the woman they had underestimated. Ethan did not remember standing up. He only knew that one moment he was at table 12 with half the room waiting for him to return to the version of himself they understood, and the next moment he was walking toward the tall windows with Noah asleep against his chest, leaving the untouched steak, the investor folders, and Claire's polished disappointment behind him. Outside the glass, Manhattan glittered 40 floors below, all headlights and towers and restless money. Inside his arms, his son made one soft sound, not a cry, just the tiny sigh of a child finally safe enough to sleep. Ethan looked down and felt something twist behind his ribs. He had built a life around control because control had never abandoned him. It answered emails. It signed contracts. It returned calls. Grief did not. Fatherhood did not. A baby did not. 11 months earlier, when Emily Whitmore was still alive, the nursery had smelled like lavender detergent and warm milk, and Noah had slept best on her shoulder while she hummed a melody Ethan could never remember correctly. After she was gone, the song went with her. He had buried himself in board meetings, foundations, memorial speeches, and private doctors who spoke in gentle voices about adjustment. He told himself Noah was too young to remember. He told himself babies healed faster than adults because that was easier than admitting his son reached for a mother who would not come through the door. Aaliyah stood a few steps away, quiet as a witness, not intruding, not retreating. Ethan turned to her slowly. "That song," he said. His voice sounded unfamiliar, scraped down to something honest. What was it? Aaliyah's eyes softened, but her posture stayed professional. My mother used to hum it, she said. She worked nights at St. Mary's in Queens. Sometimes she helped in the pediatric wing when they were short-staffed. She said some babies did not need louder voices. They needed a rhythm that told them somebody was still there. Ethan looked at Noah's blue cloth, then back at Aaliyah. My wife used to hum something like that. The room changed again, but this time no one whispered. Even Claire stopped moving. The name of the woman Ethan rarely spoke in public seemed to pass through the candles like a memory with bare feet. Aaliyah did not rush to comfort him. That was her gift. She knew when silence was respect. Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on his son. Emily died 6 months ago, he said, and the words carried farther than he intended. Since then, everyone keeps telling me what Noah needs. Routine, structure, specialists, the right environment. I gave him all of it. He let out a breath that almost broke. But I did not give him me. Aaliyah looked at the sleeping baby, then at the billionaire holding him as if he had just learned the shape of his own heart. Children know when we are present, she said. They also know when we are just nearby. No one in the Sterling room moved. That sentence had no accusation in it, which made it cut deeper. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself. Across the room, Claire rose from her chair, gathering her purse with quiet irritation. I am sorry about Emily, she said, though her voice carried more discomfort than sorrow. But this is not the place to fall apart. Ethan looked at her for a long second. The old Ethan would have cared about appearances, investor confidence, damage control. The old Ethan would have thanked the staff, paid the bill, and escaped into the elevator with his grief folded neatly inside his jacket. But Noah's cheek was warm against his chest, and Aaliyah's words had opened a door he could not close. No, he said quietly. This is exactly the place. Claire stared at him. Ethan did not look away. Because this is where my son needed me, and I almost chose the room instead. Ethan's words did not echo loudly, but they changed where everyone stood. Not physically, something deeper. Something invisible shifted beneath the polished floor, beneath the white tablecloths, beneath all the practiced manners that had been hiding discomfort since the first cry. Claire remained by her chair with her purse in one hand, her expression caught between disbelief and embarrassment. She had expected Ethan to apologize to the room, to smooth the moment over, to protect the evening the way powerful men protected investments. Instead, he stood near the windows with his sleeping son against his heart and told the truth in front of strangers. That was more dangerous than any scandal because truth gave other people permission to see him as human. Victoria stepped forward again, but slower this time, as if the air itself warned her to be careful. Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should escort you to the private elevator, she said. Her voice was soft, trained, expensive. Ethan looked at her, then at Aaliyah, then at the dining room full of guests who had suddenly remembered how quiet respect could be. No, he said. We are not leaving because my son cried. Victoria froze. Of course, sir. I know what you meant. Ethan adjusted Noah gently, exactly the way Aaliyah had shown him. You meant to remove the discomfort. But the discomfort was not my son. It was how this room responded to him. No one touched a fork. No one reached for a glass. The man at the corner table lowered his head so far that his chin nearly touched his collar. Aaliyah felt the weight of the moment settle around her, and with it came an old instinct. Stay small, stay safe, do not let the room turn on you. But then Noah sighed in his sleep, and she remembered why she had stepped forward in the first place. Not to be praised, not to be seen, to answer need when everyone else answered judgment. Claire's voice sliced through the silence, neat and cold. Ethan, you are emotional. That is understandable, but you are letting a waitress turn a difficult parenting moment into a public lecture. Aaliyah did not flinch, but Ethan did. Not from anger, from recognition. He heard the word waitress the way Claire meant it. Not as a job, as a boundary, as a ceiling, as a reminder of who was allowed to speak and who was supposed to serve quietly. Ethan looked at Aaliyah. Miss Carter, he said, and the room heard the respect in the name. Did my son bother you? Aaliyah answered without hesitation. No, sir. He is a baby. He was asking for help the only way he knows how. Ethan nodded, then turned back to Claire. And did she bother you? Claire's lips parted, but nothing came out at first. That silence answered better than words. Ethan's face changed. Not dramatically, not cruelly, but with the clear sadness of a man finally seeing the shape of a mistake. I think this evening is over, he said. Claire stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am. Because of this? Because of what this revealed. The sentence landed clean. Claire looked around, realizing the room that once protected her polish no longer knew where to place its loyalty. She set her napkin on the table with stiff precision and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking across the marble like a countdown nobody wanted to follow. Ethan did not call after her. He only lowered his cheek against Noah's soft hair and closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them again, he turned to Victoria. The staff member who made space for my son when no one else did will not be disciplined. Victoria's cheeks colored. Of course not. And the guest who made that comment about the kitchen will apologize to her before he leaves. The corner table went still. Aaliyah looked at Ethan, surprised despite herself. She had not asked for that. Women like her often learn not to ask for dignity out loud because the world made them feel expensive for wanting it. But here it was, placed on the table in front of everyone. The man stood slowly, uncomfortable in his own skin now that attention no longer favored him. Miss Carter, he said, voice low, I apologize. What I said was disrespectful. Aaliyah held his gaze. Thank you, she said. She did not smile to make him comfortable. She did not soften the lesson so the room could digest it more easily. She accepted the apology like someone accepting something overdue, not something generous. Ethan watched that, and in her stillness, he saw another kind of power. Not the kind that commanded rooms. The kind that did not need to. The apology did not fix the room, but it cracked something open. For the first time that night, the Sterling room stopped pretending that polished manners were the same as character. Aaliyah stood near the service bar with her hands folded and her face calm, yet inside her chest, memories moved like shadows behind glass. She thought of all the times she had swallowed words because rent was due on Friday. All the times a guest had snapped fingers inches from her face, called her sweetheart without kindness, asked for another server without saying why, then smiled when management looked over. She had learned to survive those moments by making herself smooth, efficient, almost weightless. But tonight, in a room where a billionaire held his sleeping child like a prayer, she felt the strange ache of being seen without having to perform gratitude for it. Marcus Reed, the head chef, appeared at the kitchen doorway, his white coat dusted with flour, his eyes soft with quiet pride. He had watched Aaliyah cover double shifts, share leftover staff meals with new bussers, stay late to help clean even when her feet were swollen from standing for 10 hours. He knew the truth about her, the part the dining room would never guess from a name tag. Aaliyah Carter had once been accepted into a child development program at Hunter College, had paid the deposit with money saved in envelopes, had even bought one used textbook with a cracked spine and yellow notes in the margins. Then Micah got sick for 3 weeks, her mother missed work, the electric bill came due, and the dream folded itself away so the family could keep the lights on. That was how sacrifice often looked. Not dramatic, not announced, just a young woman placing her future quietly behind everyone else's needs. Ethan did not know all of that yet, but he could sense the depth behind her stillness. He shifted Noah carefully and walked toward her, no entourage, no executive posture, no billion-dollar shield between them. Miss Carter, he said again, and the room seemed to hold the name more respectfully the second time. I owe you an apology too. Aaliyah's eyes lifted to his. For what, sir? Ethan looked around the room before answering, as if he wanted the truth to have witnesses. For not seeing you until I needed you. That sentence reached places money had never entered. Victoria looked down. Marcus lowered his eyes. Several guests shifted, uncomfortable because the apology was not only his. It belonged to every table that had accepted her service without granting her presence. Aaliyah breathed in slowly. She could have made it easy for him. People expected black women to turn pain into comfort for everyone else, to smile quickly, forgive neatly, and make the room feel clean again. But Aaliyah did not rush. She looked at Noah asleep against his father's chest, then back at Ethan. You saw me tonight, she said. Just make sure it changes how you see the next person too. Ethan nodded, and for once, the gesture was not corporate. It was humble. At table 12, his phone kept lighting up beside the investor folders. Names appeared across the screen. Partners, board members, men waiting for numbers, promises, and the old Ethan Whitmore who never let a human moment interrupt a financial one. He looked at the phone, then at Noah, then at Aaliyah. The choice should have been difficult. It was not. Ethan picked up the phone, turned it off, and placed it face down on the table. A murmur moved through the room. Not shock exactly. Recognition. A man who had built an empire by always answering power had finally ignored it for his child. Noah stirred, his lips trembling with the edge of a dream. Ethan stiffened for half a second, then remembered. Breathe. Slow. Steady. Present. He did. The baby settled. Aaliyah watched him, and the smallest smile touched her face, not because the billionaire had become good in one scene, but because change had begun where pride ended. Outside, Manhattan kept glowing. Inside, the richest man in the room stood quietly beside the waitress everyone had underestimated, learning that fatherhood was not a title, grief was not an excuse, and dignity was not something the powerful give to the overlooked. It was something they were late to recognize. By the time dessert should have arrived, nobody in the Sterling room cared about dessert anymore. The chocolate soufflés waited under silver domes near the kitchen pass, perfect and forgotten, while the dining room sat inside a silence that felt newly honest. Ethan returned to table 12, not to resume the meeting, but to gather Noah's blanket, the blue cloth, and the small leather diaper bag his assistant had placed beneath the chair like an afterthought. Every movement was slower now, more careful, less like a man managing a problem, and more like a father learning the weight of presence. Across the table, the investor folders remained unopened, their embossed logos catching the candlelight. 20 minutes earlier, those folders had mattered more than almost anything. Now they looked strangely thin, paper pretending to be destiny. Aaliyah picked up the fallen pacifier, wrapped it in a fresh napkin, and placed it beside the diaper bag without a word. Ethan noticed. That was the difference. Earlier, she had done a dozen quiet things no one saw. Refilling water before glasses emptied. Removing plates without interrupting conversations. Adjusting a chair so an older guest would not stumble. Now every small act carried meaning because the room had finally learned to pay attention. Victoria stood near the host's station, whispering into a headset, trying to sound composed while her face betrayed the panic of someone who knew the evening would be discussed long after the last candle burned out. Several guests had their phones out, not filming wildly, not making noise, but holding evidence of the moment the room changed. A clip had already been sent to someone, then someone else. That is how modern shame travels, quietly at first, then everywhere. Ethan saw one phone pointed toward Aaliyah and raised his hand, not harshly, but firmly enough to stop it. Do not turn her kindness into a spectacle, he said. The guest lowered the phone. Aaliyah looked at Ethan, surprised again. She was used to being exposed when people wanted complaints documented, but protected when kindness needed dignity. That was new. Marcus walked out from the kitchen and stood beside her, not in front of her, not speaking for her, just there. It mattered. For years, Aaliyah had carried herself through rooms where support arrived too late or not at all. Tonight, standing beneath chandeliers she would never own, she felt the quiet strength of not standing alone. Ethan turned toward the dining room with Noah still sleeping against his chest. My son and I are leaving now, he said. Not because he cried. Not because anyone here was inconvenienced. We are leaving because he needs rest, and I should have understood that before anyone had to teach me. The words moved through the table slowly, touching every person who had once mistaken wealth for wisdom. Then he looked at Aaliyah. Thank you, he said. 2 plain words. No performance. No big check waved in the air. No grand gesture meant to make the giver look noble. Just gratitude, stripped clean. Aaliyah nodded. You are welcome, sir. Noah stirred, opened his eyes for half a second, and looked toward her with the soft confusion of a child waking between worlds. Aaliyah lifted the blue cloth slightly and tucked it closer to his hand. He may need that tonight, she said. Ethan nodded like a man receiving instructions more valuable than any contract on the table. Near the exit, Claire was gone. Her absence left no hole in the room, only a space where a cold expectation had once stood. Ethan stepped into that space differently now. He did not stride. He did not command. He carried. And as the elevator doors opened, the entire restaurant watched the billionaire leave with his child held high against his heart, while the black waitress who had been treated as background stood in the center of the room, as the only person who had truly understood what mattered. Morning came to Manhattan with gray light and the low rush of traffic rising between the towers. The Sterling Room looked different before opening, less like a palace and more like a workplace. Chairs were turned upside down on tables. White linens waited in folded stacks, and the chandeliers hung dim above a floor still being polished by people who knew the city's luxury was often built before sunrise. Aaliyah Carter arrived at 9:15, coffee in one hand, hair pinned neatly, sneakers still carrying the ache of the night before. She had told herself not to think about Ethan Whitmore. She had told herself wealthy men had emotional moments all the time and forgot them by morning. Rooms like that were famous for making promises in candlelight and losing them in daylight. But when she stepped through the service entrance, Marcus Reed was standing by the kitchen door with a look on his face she could not read. "You have a visitor," he said. Aaliyah stopped. Near the front of the empty dining room, beside table 12, Ethan stood alone with Noah in his arms. No security, no assistant, no Claire, just a father in a simple gray sweater, holding his son against his chest with careful hands. Noah was awake, quiet, gripping the little blue cloth. When he saw Aaliyah, his face brightened in that soft, unguarded way babies have before the world teaches them caution. Ethan smiled, but it was not the public smile from magazine covers. It was smaller, tired, human. "I hope it is all right that we came before service," he said. Aaliyah walked closer, cautious but calm. "Is Noah okay?" Ethan looked down at his son. He slept 5 hours straight. The words sounded ordinary, but his voice treated them like a miracle. "I held him the way you showed me." Aaliyah nodded, and something warm moved behind her eyes, though she kept her face steady. Ethan reached into the diaper bag and pulled out an envelope. Not flashy, not sealed with a logo, just plain cream paper with her name written by hand. "This is not payment," he said quickly, as if he understood the danger of making dignity look like a transaction. "Last night, you gave my son what no one in my circle knew how to give him. You also gave me a lesson I should have learned long ago." Aaliyah did not take the envelope yet. "What is it?" Ethan breathed in, slow and steady, the way she had taught him. "A letter, an apology in writing, because spoken apologies can disappear when powerful people get comfortable again. And a scholarship offer, if you want it, through a foundation my wife started before she passed. Child development, nursing, early education, whatever path belongs to you. No contract, no obligation, no publicity." Aaliyah stared at him. For a moment, she was back in Queens, looking at that used textbook with the cracked spine, telling herself dreams could wait one more year, then another, then another. Her fingers touched the edge of the envelope, but she still did not pull it away. "Why?" she asked. Ethan looked at Noah, then at her. "Because last night I realized how many people know how to serve a room, and how few know how to care for it. My wife believed in people like you before I knew how to see them." The restaurant was quiet around them. Marcus stood in the distance, pretending not to watch, failing completely. Aaliyah finally accepted the envelope. She did not cry. She did not collapse into gratitude. She held it with both hands, like something fragile but not undeserved. Noah reached toward her, waving the blue cloth with a happy little sound. Aaliyah smiled then, truly smiled, and touched 2 fingers gently to the cloth. "You keep that close, little man," she said. Ethan watched the gesture, and his eyes softened. "I canceled my meetings for the week," he said. "Noah and I are going home. Just home." It should not have sounded revolutionary, but it did. Because some men build empires to avoid empty rooms, and some only become fathers when they finally enter one. Aaliyah looked around the Sterling Room, at the tables waiting to be dressed, the glasses waiting to shine, the silent space where the night before everything had changed. She had not shouted. She had not begged to be seen. She had stepped forward, listened to a child, and reminded a man with everything that presence cannot be purchased. Ethan carried Noah toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for seeing my son." Aaliyah met his eyes. "Thank you for finally seeing him too." The door opened, morning light spilled across the marble, and for once, the richest thing in the room was not money. It was grace.